Welcome to today's event. We're super excited to have you all join us. I love all the hellos. So friendly. Sorry, lots of moving parts. All right. So, welcome to day two of Demystifying Industry, hosted by Learn with Libby. So, this is our free 3-day virtual event clarifying all your pharmaceutical industry questions and providing exposure to diverse industry professionals. So, tonight we'll cover clinical and medical roles within industry. And before we hear from our awesome speakers, I have a few logistics to cover and a quick recap in case you missed our industry overview last night. And disclaimer here, the information presented is for educational purposes only. The views expressed during the event are those of the speakers and panelists and do not represent any entities they may be affiliated with. And a couple things to note, the event is being recorded. The recordings will be emailed to all registered attendees and shared on YouTube at the conclusion of this 3-day event, as long as we have no tech issues, so cross your fingers. And then we're going to use the Q&A function through Slido. So use the chat to share your thoughts and any other comments that you have, but keep your questions in the app called Slido. And with the next slide, you'll be able to get that all set up. And so if you find something insightful or helpful, share it on your socials. If you found it helpful, probably someone else in your network will too. So share it on your socials, tag at learnwithlibby.rx on Instagram or even LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to repost as well. So here is, in a second, you'll see the QR code there or the code to join our Slido. So there are two tabs within Slido, one specifically for Q&A, and then there's another one for polls. If you have any questions throughout the presentations that are going on this evening, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we will address them at the end during our panel. I'll give you a few more seconds to get that pulled up, but we'll also see this slide again. If you don't get it this time, you'll be all right. All right. And so our day one recap. To note, this event and its contents are really geared toward US PharmD students, but we had a wide range of attendees yesterday evening. And so all are welcome here and all will gain valuable insights, but we have lots of PharmDs on the call. So that's where our information will be tailored to. And so last night we covered what industry really means. And so industry is an umbrella term for a diverse range of sectors and activities aimed at improving patient care, advancing medical research, and enhancing healthcare outcomes. There are 3 phases to get a molecule to market. You've got your discovery, development, as well as commercialization. And then you have your common functional areas within clinical research and development, medical affairs, commercial, and regulatory affairs. And tonight we'll really be diving into those first 2. And then industry trends forecasts more complex therapies and a healthcare landscape that requires the specialized knowledge of advanced degree holders, such as PharmDs, PhDs, physician assistants, and other professionals out there. So we're seeing more of these advanced degree holders transition into non-traditional roles. And so for tonight, we're going to get clinical. So we're going to talk about clinical development and move into medical affairs and finish off with pharmacovigilance and safety, and then have a nice Q&A panel to get those questions answered and hear more from our speakers and panelists. And so here is our lineup of speakers and panelists for this evening. We have Doctors Duke, Hernandez, Washington, and Godlewski, and Holly as our fellow panelists. So we'll kick things off with Dr. Duke.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay still?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Libby, and thanks for everyone for joining. I also wanted to thank you for that disclaimer. I was going to say that at the beginning that these slides I'm about to share and everything that I'm about to talk about is my personal opinion, and it does not reflect my employer, who is Merck. So With that, I can introduce my topic. I'll be discussing clinical development, specifically in the context of regulatory medical writing. So, I am a senior scientist within oncology results reporting, and I'm within global clinical trial operations, which is within global clinical development. So you might be wondering, how medical writing, what does that have to do with clinical development? I'm sure you're all aware of the drug development process, the drug discovery all the way through approval. There's several different steps. And so medical writers are actually part of the clinical trial team, at least at Merck, and we support the clinical development process at almost all stages of clinical development. So, for example, we lead the development of documents that span and enable the clinical and sorry, they enable excuse me, that enable the clinical and approval phases of the drug development cycle. As you can see, we have trial level documents such as protocols and amendments. We have the informed consent forms, which go to the patients to make sure that they understand what they're signing up for when they enroll in a clinical study. The bread and butter of medical writing is the clinical study report, where we prepare all the efficacy and safety data. We have patient safety narratives and all these other documents that eventually go to the FDA or whatever regulatory agency. I work in a global role, so I work with the EMA, Japan, China, all regulatory agencies to submit our data to them and hopefully have an approval of a worldwide marketing application. So there's also program level documents such as investigator brochures and briefing books, and medical writers are involved in all of these documents, and it's a really cool experience to be able to work alongside so many bright people in clinical development in order to get drugs approved for patients. So on to the next slide. So I specifically work in oncology. These are our areas of focus. However, there's a lot of other ones that are within these umbrellas. And actually, I have had the opportunity to work across all of these tumor types, which is really interesting. There's so many different development programs across the oncology therapeutic area, and so I've been able to write protocols and clinical study reports and investigation investigator brochures, all supporting these various programs. And so I specifically chose Merck because of their commitment to advance cancer. And from what I understand, we have one of the largest development programs in the industry across many tumor types, 30 or so. So it's very interesting to be able to play such a large role in oncology clinical development. And so moving on to our medical writing roles. So, in order to support these tumor development programs, there are several different medical writers who are involved in the clinical development process. And so, the top one there is regulatory medical writing. And so, that is my primary role is authoring the primary regulatory documents for submission and clinical trial conduct. And you can see all the other different types of medical writing. You've probably heard of publication medical writers who are preparing the journal articles and things that you see in New England Journal of Medicine. There are medical writers at drug companies who also prepare those in plain language summaries, patient narratives I touched on a little bit, and there's so many different roles, and they may all look different at different companies. So this is just how we organize, or these are just the roles that I'm familiar with, but there may be others at other companies. Overall, they're generally similar buckets, though, when it comes to medical writing. So when it comes to medical writing responsibilities, overall, my role is to translate complex scientific and medical information into accessible and actionable content. And the way that we do this is by leading and managing those authoring activities of the in scope documents, whether it's a protocol, whether we're starting a study and we're working with the clinical trial team to prepare the inclusion exclusion criteria. All of those things are managed and led by the medical writer. We also work with key contributors to prepare content and ensure consistency across documents and across programs. So, if we are working in breast cancer, we want to make sure that all of the protocols and all of the messaging across the program is consistent and aligned with the strategy of the company for that particular program. So, as medical writers, we're also contributing to the development of those key messages and ensure that those key messages are clearly stated. So, a big part of what I do is making sure that things are very concise and we're not adding any, we call it lean authoring, where you're not adding a lot of fluff and you're pretty much presenting the data and presenting the key messages that align with the company strategy. And another thing that you don't really think about in medical writing is being a project manager. So a lot of what I do is managing timelines, which I never thought that I would leave pharmacy school and work with timelines. But a lot of what I do is having to stay organized and make sure that the people on my team are reviewing and we're making the milestones that we need to in order to have a successful submission. And so for an entry medical writer, and this may differ across companies, but the preferred qualifications are a degree in a life science, and that's preferably pharmacy or medicine. But you can also be considered if you have a bachelor's with 5 years, a master's with 4 years, or that doctorate level degree with a year of relevant career experience. And that this is for an entry level position. Um, Other companies may not have entry level roles, which is something that I think is a challenge for folks who are trying to leave industry or leave practice or enter industry because they're having a deficiency in entry level positions. It can be challenging, but Merck actually does have an entry level medical writing position, and so that's why I wanted to highlight this. And for as far as transferable skills, project management is important, like I said, being able to collaborate on a team, and of course, having that scientific knowledge because medical writing demands communication skills, of course, and a high degree of familiarity with requirements of major markets, but also solid therapeutic area knowledge is key, as well as being able to manage multiple projects at once. And so the I think being in order to stand out, I think having that demonstrated motivation is key. So, scientific writing, especially outside of your current role requirement. So, have you authored a publication? Have you authored an abstract? Or have you prepared a poster? Or things like that. You can also get experience through professional organizations, writing a blog, writing a newsletter, any of those things. It doesn't have to be a clinical study report or a protocol. We, I think, consider any opportunity where you're looking to get that experience, I think is going to really help you if you're considering an entry level medical writing role. And so my advice for breaking into industry, and I was going to do a medical writing specific one, but I think it would be helpful for you to hear advice on industry in general because I think that is the hardest part is just getting in. And you're going to hear this probably several times tonight, but networking is so important. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me when we're looking to hire one of our entry level positions, and I'm telling you it's really helpful when you've already been known by the people who are on the hiring team that you are interested and that you have already put your foot out there that you are looking to move into a role. So networking is important. You can do that on LinkedIn. You can do that within your current role that you're in. Maybe you have a friend who's a fellow, maybe network with them and they can probably connect you with other people who are interested in similar things that you're interested in. So, really just putting yourself out there, it can be awkward, but I think that is the number one thing. And then the second most important thing is to stand out by creating your own opportunities to get the experience you need. Like I mentioned before, you don't have to have, if we're using medical writing for an example, you don't have to have that protocol experience, or it doesn't have to be It's an entry level position. They don't expect you to have that experience. But if you have shown motivation that you're creating your own opportunities, maybe you did start that blog at your school, or maybe you you worked on a publication. Like all of those things I think are great and they really show your true motivation to break into that field. So, a couple other things, just try to avoid getting caught up in job titles. Some roles at other companies are just coded at a different title than others, and so some may look higher, so some are like manager or director. Don't worry about that. It's really easy to get just I don't know how to it's really easy to get caught up in what your title is. It's really about what do you do at the end of the day? If it's something that you feel is aligned with your interests and you're growing, I think that's the whole point of pursuing that next role that you're looking for. Also, find a mentor. Find someone who can advocate for you, who can look over your CV, who can listen to if you're interviewing for a role where you have to give a presentation, who can listen to your presentation. Those people are really just people in your corner who are going to help you and they're going to encourage you and guide you along as you move through the interview process and the application process. And so, with that, just trust the process. It's uncomfortable. It's honestly really challenging to break into industry. I've heard it from so many people. It's just don't get discouraged because there's probably so many other people just like you who are trying to break in. And I think you just have to trust and be persistent and really create those opportunities where you can. And I just wanted to I included this slide just because I wanted you all to remember that everyone's path is different. So my path, I started at UNCW in Wilmington, went on to UNC to pharmacy school, did an internship at GSK, ultimately got an entry level position at Merck, but your path could be completely different. You may choose to work in clinical practice for a little bit and then enter industry. But what matters is that it's your path and that you are committed to propelling your career, and that's why you're here. And so I just wanted to leave you with that everyone's path is different, and I wish you all the best, and thank you.
All right, next up, we have Jill Hernandez.
Hey everyone, I'm excited that you all have joined, and I will echo what Savannah said. These are my own views. I work for Syneos Health, and this has nothing to do with them, just to get that out of the way. So, for my first slide, I'm going to share about what my role is. So, I am a research science liaison, which is a little bit of a unique role. I actually work for Syneos Health, which is a CRO. And if you're not familiar with that, we are a contract research organization. They like to say that we're a biopharmaceutical solutions organization, which really means that we do everything for clinical trials except come up with the molecule. So we work with a lot of companies, big and small, that they've come up with some new drug and they need to get it to market. And so we do the whole thing from start to finish. Even once the product is launched, we can do that also. It's a big company. There's 30,000 employees globally, and I think like 95% of the company is remote. It's very different from what I came from, which was in a hospital. So I only work on clinical trials. I don't do anything with on-market products. My role is very synergistic with the clinical team, which is like what Savannah's, she's part of that whole get it up and going and make sure all the things are happening. I am technically a consultant. I'm a specialized consultant. So I'm part of a big group of consultants. A lot of them are pharmacists. And then I'm a specialized RSL consultant, which is a little confusing. But as a consultant, I just hop from project to project. So I think I'm on 3 projects right now. So 3 different trials. And it just depends on what they need. So I essentially just fill the gaps. So that might mean that I do engagements with principal investigators who are usually physicians or other site staff like study coordinators or pharmacists that dispense the investigational drugs. As a general rule, our goal is to identify enrollment hurdles. So why are you not enrolling? Is it the inclusion exclusion criteria? Is your patient population? Is it staffing? Like, how can we help? I also help with site identifications, looking at physicians and their specialties and where they're located and engaging them, trying to pump up interest in the trial. Sometimes we ask for referral sites, other physicians in their network that might want some education that will help them refer patients to the trial. We like to hear if there's issues with inclusion-exclusion criteria. Sometimes these clinical trials are just not really in sync with standard of care or what's actually feasible at a site level. And if that is a problem, we try to help out with that. So we also do like protocol education, really whatever the client, who's usually a drug company, needs from us, like we fill those gaps. And a big part of that is maintaining relationships with the physician and like boosting brand awareness for the client, especially the small companies that maybe only have 50 employees and they're all PhDs and they've come up with this drug, but nobody's heard of them and they need help getting it to market. So we help with that. And then throughout the life of the study, which may be 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we want to keep those physicians engaged and interested and not let it fall by the wayside. Another task that I do is like KOL and site mapping. So that just depends on study criteria and patient population. This can be at the beginning of the trial, or sometimes if it's lagging, we'll start fresh again and try to find more sites midway through. One thing that we really try to push is that medical affairs is moving to the left. So what that means is, I think historically medical affairs a lot of times is post market after the drug is approved and it launches. Medical affairs is there to carry it forward. And we are trying to move to the left. There has been studies that have shown that the farther left medical affairs is, meaning the earlier in drug development and clinical trial process, the earlier involved that medical affairs is, the better. Like the shorter the time to market, which means the faster it reaches patients and reaches trying to help out our patients, which really is our ultimate goal. One thing that's a little bit unique about my job too is that I'm 100% virtual. Syneos does have field RSLs, which is like an MSL role. They'll have a territory and they have certain sites that they go see, but those are kind of project specific and they may just be hired on for the duration of the clinical trial. But mine, because I'm a consultant, I just hop around and do whatever they need me to do at a global level. So just a typical process for that is like we'll get a contract with a client, we'll get the protocol, we do our own background research and kind of self-training, doing stuff with thyroid eye disease, which I knew nothing about, but had to teach myself, read the protocol, read the informed consent, see what are we doing, and then move from there. Sometimes we'll meet with the clients and spend an hour kind of reviewing their goals and like what they really love about the protocol and try to emphasize that when we speak to the physicians. But a lot of it is on us really to self-train. It's usually a really short timeline. We do a lot of initial outreach with emails. Like today, I just sent out, I think, 144 emails to 6 different countries, trying to drum up some meetings with them. We set up engagement calls, and then depending on what we find out, we put it in a deliverable, which is PowerPoint usually, and give that to the client. Every week, we'll give them a deliverable, and it has all the insights and actions that need to be taken. And just really, it depends on what our goal is for that particular trial. Do a lot of meetings, typically in the morning. Because I am global, a lot of my team is in the UK or India. So the UK is 6 hours ahead of me, and India is 11 to 12, depending on the time of the year. A lot of stuff in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I try to get caught up. A lot of virtual meetings, a lot of chatting on Teams, a lot of emails. We do a lot of Excel spreadsheets that track stuff, which if you hate Excel, this is probably not the place for you. It's definitely been a learning curve. Even for me it's just, I'm not a big fan, but we're making it work. And then I do a lot of PowerPoint decks, so building out decks and just all sorts of different things. That's my normal day. This week, I actually got pulled into an internal project. There's like a big meeting in a couple of weeks in London, and all the big fancy people are getting together to determine our trajectory for the company and all this. For whatever reason, I'm filling in and helping plan that meeting and figure out all of the activities that they're going to do. And you know how you show up at a meeting and they have an agenda and all the things, I'm helping them build that. So it's not really my typical task, but that is very typical for a consultant role. So since I'm in that umbrella, I'm pulled in and helping that. I think I reviewed everything that is on this slide. On the right side of it was a graphic that we send out to clients, and it just has some statistics about impacts that we have had on trials. For my next slide, so this is just a little bit about our team. So we have a lot of pharmacists, we have a few MDs and some PhDs. This role does require a graduate level degree. And you have to be super, super capable at working independently and being very proactive. I think because we are all remotes, like it's on you. And it's not so much that like you need to be at your desk from 8 to 5 every day and be available like you are maybe in like retail or hospital pharmacy. You need to be in your spot. It's not so much like that, but like you need to manage your schedule. You need to respond quickly. It's very much on you to handle it and get it done. The last thing you want is for a client to complain about you. That's definitely not what you want to do. We do provide a bridge between our client, who's a drug company, and the clinical team, which is more like the logistics of the trial. We have to manage client needs. A lot of times they're really picky. They've invested a lot of time and effort into these new drugs and they want it to be just right. There's a little bit of managing your client. We have to make high quality project materials and deliverables. So we want our stuff to look good, right? We want it to look professional and not sloppy and thrown together. We also assess the landscape, which means like what else is going on, what other companies are doing in the same disease state, what's already on the market, what's doing well, what's not. We have to forecast and then also develop our strategy to meet the client's needs. Of course, good verbal and written communication skills, critical thinking, and problem solving. So that's the gist of what our team is. And then the team structure is because I'm in a consultant group, it's a little bit different. And I will echo what Savannah said. Don't get caught up in the titles because they're different every single company. The very top tier of our people are the project leads, and they may be called like a director or above. And they're really the one just making sure that everything's going. And then our project managers are like engagement managers, senior engagement managers, and they're really the point person between the client and our team. They approve all the deliverables before we send them out each week, and they provide guidance and feedback. The last tier is the consultant. So these are more of your day-to-day worker bees, and there's a variety. The entry level is an analyst, and then you can move up to an associate consultant and a senior consultant, which is what I am. Even though I'm an RSL, I'm considered a senior consultant. Day-to-day activities on the project, working with them and doing the deliverables and scheduling all the meetings. And generally, the higher up you go, the more focused you are on firm building, which is essentially bringing in business. Our medical affairs consulting group has a few different arms. Commercial strategy is one group that falls in this umbrella. The value axis and HEOR is a big group. Risk and program management, and then medical affairs strategy, which is where I am. And then quality and compliance, and then R&D advisory group. Those are our umbrellas. And there's not a lot of interaction between them as far as that I've seen. We do a bit. My group does a bit with the HEOR group, but these verticals are doing their own thing. A little bit about my background. So I started in independent retail when I was in pharmacy school. I think almost everybody does. It seems I really didn't know what I was going to do and never thought I would end up here. I did not have any defined career goals. I think a lot of you probably are like real goal oriented and focused and know exactly what you want to do. And that was not me at all. I just was like, oh, I got into pharmacy school. Great. I don't know. I'll figure it out. At some point, I thought I was going to do nuclear pharmacy. I took all the electives. I'm an authorized nuclear pharmacist, which I have not used in years, but there it is. So after graduation, I went into home infusion, moved over to inpatient pharmacy for a little bit. That was definitely not for me. I took some weekend call for nuclear, but where I'm located, there's just not a huge demand for that. I did like home infusion. If you like to be a little bit clinical, but not round with the team, that's a great field. You get to manage a few things, but it's not like being in a hospital. I just randomly stumbled across a job opening for an investigational drug service pharmacy manager role, which is, there's a few different names for that, but the research pharmacy. Actually, my son was in a clinical trial for food allergies, and when I saw the job posting, texted my study coordinator and was like, what is this? And she was like, yes, you need to apply for this. So that kind of goes back to the networking. So like she put in a good word for me and they hired me. I knew nothing about clinical trials. I don't think we ever discussed it in school. This job was amazing. If you ever get the opportunity to work in a research pharmacy, do it. It's not like Bunsen burners, which a lot of people think. It's dispensing investigational drugs. So I was in that role for 7 years, dispensed on clinical trials. We typically carried about 130 trials covering all disease states for the whole campus. It's just really interesting. You get to see what science is trying to do. Not it doesn't all go to market, but it's interesting to see what we're trying. It's very innovative and I just really liked it. While I was in that job, I started an MBA and quickly remembered that like business is not for me. So switched over and did a master's in healthcare administration. I also picked up a graduate certificate in regulatory sciences because again, not really sure what I was going to do, but might as well. So that's what I was doing. But when I was ready to move on, I knew I didn't want to go to hospital. I didn't want to go to retail. What am I going to do now? So I think I applied to a million different jobs over a few months that had all sorts of job titles. Didn't really know what they were, but it sounded interesting. I do not recommend that. I would say pick something and try to be a little bit more targeted in your approach. It is difficult because the job titles are very inconsistent and it's all over the place. So try to do your research and tailor your approach a little bit better. It's a little bit less heartache, I would say. I just stumbled onto this job. It looked like a perfect fit for me because it was 100% virtual, only clinical trials, and that's pretty much all I knew about it when I applied. So my interview process was a phone screen, and then I got moved to a virtual interview with the hiring manager, which went pretty well. And then the next step was to do another interview with someone on my team. And then the final was to do a presentation on a paper that they selected. So the paper they sent me was renal failure in adults, which I had not done renal in probably a decade, and I was working in pediatrics. So it was a huge learning curve to remember all the things. I was very lucky to have found a mentor who was the husband of a pharmacist I had used to work with. He works for Merck, and he was amazing. He spent a lot of time with me that week of my presentation. I would present to him, and he would look at my slide deck and say, "This is terrible. We need to redo this." He was such a big help. I absolutely would not have gotten that job without his feedback. If you can find somebody that will take that time to invest in you, absolutely do it. The one thing that really stood out for me as a candidate for this job was that I had experienced working at a clinical site in research, and I worked on a ton of therapeutic areas. What you'll find in a lot of medical affairs is they want you to be a specialist in something, and I am not. And that was a big hurdle for me to try to look at MSL roles because I have not been in ICU or have not been in cardiology. Like I do all the things. And so that was a great fit for this role, actually. So yeah, now I'm a senior research science liaison for Syneos. I have recently started dabbling in some medical writing, which is super hard, by the way. I also just earned my MSL board certification, and I am a reviewer for the local IRB. So anybody can do that, FYI. If you want some kind of ethics experience and see a little bit of the process, you can apply to be a reviewer to IRB, and they may or may not take you, but it's a great experience. It's a volunteer role, but looks great on your CV. You get to see some things. And then I also teach a third-year elective at the local College of Pharmacy, really looking at jobs in industry and clinical trials. So this is my second year to do that. That's been a huge learning curve, but hopefully it will keep going and generate more interest. As far as advice, I would say keep your options open. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Any opportunities that come across your path, I would say absolutely grab them. Say yes. Someone asked me to be on the IRB, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. Or whatever it may be, like it just gives you more experience and more exposure. And if you hate it, that's great too, because that's not what you want to do. So don't discount bad experiences because that helps you cross things off your list. And then again, network, don't burn any bridges, always be professional. So I think that's all that I have. Hope that was a lot of information.
Yes, thank you so much, Jill. Really appreciate all the insight that you provided. And so next we'll move on to Raquel Washington.
Thank you. I thought I'd start off with my career journey. So I'm a pharmacist by training. I actually graduated with a BS and then went back and got a non-traditional PharmD and then went and got an MBA and then started a family. So my first career started in hospital pharmacy, and my interest in industry grew because of the sales rep that called on me. And he says, "You are so good with people and you have a great way of simplifying very complex information. You should think about industry. I think you'd be great." And my initial thought was, I can't even sell Avon. Nobody's listening to me. I couldn't do this. And so after he calling on me for a while, I said, let me try. I applied, got an interview, got the job. I was in industry. And so my first job was with Merck. I did a medical affairs role, which was like an MSL role with them. And I also did a commercial role at Merck. And my career progressed in large biopharma. So from Merck, I went to Wyeth, which is now Pfizer, in an MSL role supporting GI and cardiovascular. I went to Biogen IDEC, which is I think Biogen now, but I supported a drug for multiple sclerosis and launched some products. There, I went to Amgen, and I was there for 10 years. And after Amgen, I moved on to Novartis, and I was there for 8 years. In Novartis, I did a lot of different things. This was an exciting time in my career. I did a therapeutic area MSL role and then transitioned into market access, which was new for me. And I also did a population health role and then moved into a leadership role where I was leading a team. And then after Novartis, I went to something totally different, right? So don't be afraid to reinvent yourself. So I'm currently at Exact Sciences, which is not a pharma company. All those companies, pharma companies. I'm in a diagnostic company now, something totally different, oncology, and it's a mid-sized company, 6,000 employees. All those other companies, 100,000 employees on average, right? And so I just share that to say your career path can go in different directions and don't be afraid to try different things. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about my current role. So currently I am leading a team of East MSLs for a diagnostic company. And the focus of my presentation is from a hiring manager's perspective, right? Because I think a lot of times people don't really know what is that manager looking for? How can I differentiate myself? And so I'm going to try and give you a little bit of that one. So here are the key functions of the MSL role, and really it's scientific engagement and different aspects of it. So when you're hired as an MSL, you're really being hired by that company to be a subject matter expert, and you're providing education for initiatives. Now that could be a launch, it could be a label change, it could be new data that was published, or you could just be trying to identify obstacles that are hindering the adoption of innovation, right? And that innovation is whatever product that you're supporting. And then MSLs, they educate prescribers and clinicians, but also population health decision makers. And so population health decision makers are leaders within either a health system or a payer that make decisions for population. So it could be a chief medical officer, a director of population health, a director of quality, or someone like that. But any leader that is making decisions for more than one person, the prescriber may be making a decision for that patient in front of them. Population health decision makers make decisions for a population. And the goal is to really influence and inform treatment decisions and then listen to your customer and bring that voice of the customer back to the organization. And so, what the company is really looking for is to use those insights to inform and shape strategy. What direction does the company go? What education is needed? And really, networking and insight are the currency of the MSL role. And then what you want to do is maintain relationships. I think Jill talked about research support, and it's a remote role. There are some companies now that are hiring virtual MSLs, so that's a little bit different, but the majority of them still, you're trying to see people in person, virtually in a defined geography. And go to the next slide. So there's different types of MSLs. We've talked a little bit about them today. I think what I like to call out is the things that are a little bit different. There are therapeutic MSLs. You can be acute or chronic. Acute might be an inpatient hospital product. Specialty, rare diseases, which is a little bit different. They have larger geographies because there's not as many patients that are treated. So, you may have half the country, you may have the whole country. The geographies can be really large. And then radioligand is a growing area of growth and interest. And then the team that I led at Novartis, it was a value and evidence team. So that was a little bit of a different role. In that role, the MSLs called on population health decision makers in health systems and in regional payers and really looking to provide health economic, real world evidence, but information to help the adoption and implement processes to implement innovation within those organizations. And we covered the whole portfolio. So usually if you're a payer MSL, you're not just one therapeutic area. That company has multiple products. You may be covering all of those products. So you may not be able to go deep, but you need to know enough about that product in the landscape, right? The other products in the market that are competitive to be able to have a conversation. And then there's different types, right? There's pharma, which we've talked about. There's diagnostic companies like the company that I'm working for. There's device, right? Medtronic, and my husband's on an insulin pump. There's one, and that's a company, and they have MSLs. So there's different type of companies. So think non-traditionally. Don't be so hyper focused on one type of industry. Look at the different industries that MSLs are participating in or working in. Next. So when you look at skills, so what as a hiring manager, there's a job description, but really I'm looking at the talent on my team and I might say, okay, what skill sets am I missing? And even though the job description is real big, I may tell that recruiter, I'm looking for these 3, 4 skill sets, right? Healthcare system experience, clinical experience. Do they know how to present he or real world evidence to a customer? Can they have a cost conversation? And then that recruiter looks at the job description, but they're narrowing down the candidate list for people that have those experiences that I'm trying to target. But in general, a great presenter, you can be an introvert or an extrovert. You don't have to be an extrovert. There are MSLs that are introverts. You have to be able to be resilient and read a room. If the person has their arms folded, are you going to continue to chatter or are you going to read the room and say, do you have a question or pause? So you really have to be very self-aware and humbly persistent. There's a lot of rejection in this role. Everybody doesn't want to meet with you. Sometimes it's hard to get appointments. And so you have to be resilient and persistent and try to find out the best way to communicate with your customers. Someone mentioned, I think, Jill, you have to be independent. Insight gathering is important. One thing I think that's really overlooked that people really need to focus on, this is not a job to data dump. As scientists, we have all this information and we think everybody wants all the information we have. But when I coach people on storytelling with data, I say, what is the information that clinician needs to make a treatment decision and to treat appropriately? And that's what you focus on. So storytelling with data is important. And that's what I'll say about that. Things to think about, maybe go to the next slide. If you are looking to prepare yourself, look at those job descriptions. How many of those skills are you matching? And if you're not, how can you develop those skills so that you can be better prepared? The only thing, I just cut and pasted a job posting from a role that I had posted. The minimum requirements, basically make sure you have a good driver's license, because if you can't drive, this is not the job for you and the company won't insure you. And I've seen offers revoked because of someone's driving record. They will pull your driving record. Alcohol abuse and suspensions are definitely a no-go. And then it's important to have authorization to work in the US. Next. So preferred qualifications, someone else mentioned the PharmD, PhD, MD, NP. To be honest, in diagnostics, you don't really necessarily, everybody doesn't have a terminal degree. For example, in my organization, there are people that are geneticists, right? Because geneticists work with families and people that are being diagnosed with rare diseases. And those are master's degrees, and they do wonderfully and perform very well in role. And then there are also PAs, right? Or just people with an RN. So the majority are doctoral degree, but not everybody. So I just want to call that out. Some roles will allow you to come with no experience. Usually in our roles, we're looking for some experience, 2 years or more of experience. A lot of times they want at least 5 years of work experience. And then these are just some different areas. Next slide. So how to break in, like I said, skills development. Look at that job description. What are the skills that you have that match it? And the ones that you don't, how can you go about developing it? There's training on LinkedIn, there's podcasts and things like this that you can network and learn and ask people about their roles. There's lots of different things that you can do. Networking is very important. Job search, it's a rough job market out there. I would say you have to be persistent and willing to be in it for the long haul. If you're applying for MSL jobs and you think you're going to have a job in 3 months, that's probably not realistic. I know people that are very qualified, probably overly qualified, and they've been searching for a year. Some people 2 years. Some people get lucky and they get a job right away, right? Everybody's journey is different, but stay encouraged if this is your dream, right? And just keep working at it consistently, but also give yourself some grace and do some self care because the job search can be very disappointing. So don't forget to be good to yourself. Don't quit your day job while you're looking if you can. And try to ensure that you are at least meeting 60 to 75% of some of those skill sets. And then definitely resilience. And I talked a little bit about that. Next slide. So with that, thank you. I appreciate the time, and I think this is a wonderful platform. So thank you, Libby.
Yes, thank you. We're happy to have you. I just want to put a plug in for our Q&A. We already have some good questions there. We're not quite done yet, but don't forget to put your questions into Slido and scroll through some of the questions that are already there and like them if it's a question that you have as well. We'll make sure to get those answered. All right. And Marianne, you're up.
Hello, Marianne. Um, I'm a drug safety officer at Bayer Pharmaceuticals located in New Jersey. And I'm going to start off similar to Raquel about how my journey went because I have a lot of non-traditional role in my career path. So that'll give you some hopefully inspiration and ideas. When I was a pharmacy student, I was very involved in the Student Pharmaceutical Association. I took on some leadership role, and that's where I began practicing public speaking and doing presentations in small groups, state level, and even on the national level. The way I picked my rotations or the ways I was thinking about what careers I was interested in. And very early on, I was interested in medical information, drug information, emergency services. And when I graduated, I went into a role as a poison information specialist, and I became a certified specialist. That's a very unique opportunity. There's not many people I know that were able to break into poison control. And while I took care of emergencies and triaged patients to emergency rooms in a large geographic area, I became more and more involved in patient education, training of physicians, training of emergency services personnel, ER doctors, medical residents, the whole medical team at a hospital, as well as working part-time filling in the hospital that we were located in as a hospital pharmacist. But I started to do more writing, newsletters, and presentations. So I went to get a master's in pharmaceutical marketing and biomedical communications. At the time, I had a bachelor's of pharmacy. The PharmD wasn't an all PharmD yet. So with that master's, then I went to work for several companies that prepared documents and medical education programs for the medical congresses, sales rep training programs, patient education. I basically did a little bit of everything: audio, video, print, like I said, sales training materials. And from there, I went to be a continuing education director at a college of pharmacy where I also was on faculty. I also had a position for a short time at an international drug information center, all this while raising a family, moving a few times. So I did have to reinvent myself, but I consistently utilized all the skills and the foundations of my pharmacy degree. Then a little later on, I went back to school to get a non-traditional PharmD, while I worked full time. It can be done. You have to be self-motivated, and I am a lifelong learner. It was easy for me to do the PharmD program while I worked because I consistently did continuing education in areas that I was not familiar with. Instead of taking the easy way and doing your CE programs in easy courses, I did all the hard ones. Any areas that I was not familiar with, those are the ones that I completed and studied. From there, I worked in a home infusion center and I got experience with oncology patients. And a lot of my roles, if you notice, have to do with speaking and writing. At the home infusion center, I was communicating every day with the patients, caregivers, physicians, and nurses. And there I got expertise in oncology, which was actually a gap for me from my whole prior experience. So I broke into industry rather late in my career. I've been with Bayer for 8 years. And prior to that, I worked for a little while at Sharing in a contractor role. And I know some people yesterday were asking about contractor roles versus permanent positions. And if you see a good opportunity as a contractor and you're a good employee, you usually get hired as a permanent role within the year it gets offered to you. So don't give up on an opportunity like that. So now my first slide, I'm going to throw out a whole bunch of terms for you all to do self-study because most people have not heard of pharmacovigilance. It used to be called drug safety, patient safety and surveillance. It's basically the monitoring of the company's products. And there's an official definition about the technique of the science of monitoring products. But we monitor all the products at Bayer, every product that we have, and there's rules and definitions. For example, there's core components of what makes something an adverse event. There has to be an identifiable patient, an identifiable reporter, a suspect product. That's what it's called, suspect, because it's not definite. We're assuming it might be related to that suspect drug the patient was taken. But after evaluating all the other medications a patient's on, it may be determined that the adverse event was not related to your particular company's product. And then the fourth component is the event. There's all other related items that have to be taken into consideration. What was the seriousness of the event? Was it medically confirmed? And I'm throwing out these terms for you so you could Google pharmacovigilance and do a lot of learning on your own about all the details that are involved in drug safety. Next slide, please. At Bayer, I'm involved with all the human products, not the veterinary ones, although we do have some veterinary products. I'm involved with all the commercial products and products that are in clinical trials. And I think I said it's the entire life cycle. So we follow up and monitor all the patients from early research and clinical trials all the way through post-marketing surveillance and beyond. Even if a drug is taken off the market or it doesn't get commercialized, we still follow up. At Bayer, I'm responsible for all our pharma products, all the consumer health products that we have, including Bayer aspirin and devices. We also have not only a medical device, but we have some combination products. Drug safety is both prospective and retrospective, and it is continuous. So there are some individuals that look at retrospective data, and there's other folks that are looking at prospective information, and we're continuously monitoring the patients, and we're patient-centric. Next slide, please. These are some individual roles. Some of these on the first line are more entry level. Every case has to be processed after it's received. There's databases where the information has to be entered into. There's folks that are experts in coding, that each adverse event has a code attached to it to the smallest level. And there's a case management group that makes sure all the cases are entered properly, followed up. Then there's a group of people that just evaluate the cases and ask questions to fill in the gaps. For example, if a individual case report says that the patient had to have a stent, that's where you need to know your medical terminology, because when you want to follow up on that case, you want to know, where was the stent? What was the location, anatomy of where the stent was? So there's folks that ask the questions to do the additional following up to determine whether or not the case is related to our product or not. We follow up on everything. So you need your skills to communicate in writing and verbally with all healthcare professionals, particularly nurses and physicians, also physician assistants. We follow up with individual patients, or we have vendors and partners who collect adverse events for us. Because in the United States, adverse event reporting is not 100% mandatory as it is in other countries around the world. So we have developed relationships with vendors and partners. For example, Kaiser Organization does chart reviews and finds adverse events on our products and then sends it to us. We have vendors or organizations such as CVS Caremark, Credo, companies that have agreements with us that they're mandated to provide us the information. And the reason this is so important is because since adverse event reporting is not mandatory, we're obligated as a pharmaceutical company to monitor our products, so we need the help. We need the help of everybody out in the country to collect the information and send it to us. And we receive adverse events by email, by paper letter, snail mail, by phone call. We have our medical communications group in the call centers. If they're on the phone with consumers or patients and they hear about an adverse event, they have to send it to us within 24 hours. If sales reps are having conversations with physicians or MSLs have conversation with prescribers, they're required to report within 24 hours. We also have something called special interest questionnaires, particularly for things like skin disorders and pregnancy or pre-existing conditions like liver disease or kidney disease. There's special interest that we want to find out about the person's medical background. There's a group of physicians that do medical review. And so we have MDs on staff that look to see the medical and is it the causality? Is it a true medical association? And they analyze that information. And then we have a group of people that just do management of our vendors. Next slide, please. In addition to vendor management, we have folks that prepare the contracts, and there's a special clause about pharmacovigilance in the contract, which might have started out not having anything to do with pharmacovigilance. It might be a market access program or some other patient support program, but we need to add a clause in the contract. So we have a group that does contract clauses for PV. We also, all of us, liaison with many other groups at the company. Like I said, the call centers, medical affairs. We have labeling, interactions, and regulatory. We also have a group of people that do compliance and CAPAs, which is, if you've heard of Six Sigma, it's a group that tries to determine what was the root cause analysis or why was a case missed. Sometimes we get clusters of cases and they weren't submitted properly. So we have a compliance group that makes sure that our vendors and our external partners follow the rules that we have set up. We have a big training department so that we train everyone in the company. Once you're hired, every sales rep, MSL, anybody that works for the company has to go through a training of what is an adverse event, how to report it, and the rule about reporting it within 24 hours. So if a Bayer employee is at a picnic or barbecue on the weekend and somebody mentions to them, oh yeah, my cousin, he had a problem with Bayer aspirin, they have to report it to us. So there's those 4 components. We have an operations group. There's folks that monitor the mailboxes and make sure that all the SOPs are filed, that everybody's CV is updated every year, because when the FDA comes to do an inspection, we have to have all our documents in proper order. There's also a reconciliation group. For example, if CVS Caremark says that they sent 40 adverse events last week, but we only received 39, there's a group that have to contact CVS Caremark and find out where that 40th document is. Next slide, please. As you can see, there's so many parts to pharmacovigilance, and this is because Bayer's a large company. Some companies are smaller, so the groups would be combined. For example, signal detection and risk management at Bayer are separate groups, but at other smaller companies, they might be together in one little division. We have a literature review group. We have folks that just review literature that has been published to identify any time a Bayer drug was mentioned in the article or the case report or even an abstract. We have to enter that as an adverse event and follow up on it. Sometimes the author of the abstract or the article doesn't have additional information, but we follow up anyway. Find out as we're monitoring our products, was that related to a Bayer drug or not? We have a group in the US as well as globally that monitors changes in rules and regulations. They do audits prior to, so we're ready for an inspection. And we all have to be inspection ready at any time when the FDA could come up unannounced. Bayer is also unique in that there's a PV office in every country, but now we've regionalized things. So there's regional offices and hubs around the world. So there's a hub in Brazil for parts of South America. There's a hub in Prague. There's a hub in Berlin. There's a hub in the Asia Pacific region. The US has now become a region. So instead of just being the United States, we're the US, Canada, and South America. That's important for you to see when you're looking at job descriptions, what your responsibilities are. When I work on a global team, I have to take into account the time zones. And so sometimes I'll take a call at 9 p.m. or I'll take the call at 9 a.m. and we coordinate so that everybody isn't around the world working late or super early because we have to pay attention to all the time zones. We have a group that does narrative writing. When a case gets reported to the FDA, there's a specific format that has to be followed about how the narrative is written about the adverse event, and it describes it in, like I said, in a specific format. And then we have a group that just looks at quality, particularly if there's recalls of things like lot numbers. We have a special group that just does quality. Next slide, please. So I touched on a little bit of this, that pharmaceutical companies, it could be large, could be small, but there's biotech companies, there's research companies, there's some companies, one of the other speakers touched upon rare diseases. So you could find a niche or an area that you're very interested in. And if you're interested in a rare disease, or if you have a family member that's affected by a rare disease, you may have specialized expertise that you could utilize to promote yourself for a position like that. I know there was a position a few months ago that the Psoriasis Foundation was looking for someone, and they really wanted somebody that had very strong knowledge of psoriasis. And if you're affected by that, or you've taken it upon yourself to learn a lot about psoriasis, you'd be a real asset to that organization. This is just a list of some other areas that are industry related that you could find a role for drug safety. And I know that the FDA even has a rotation that you could do as a PharmD student. The Institute for Safe Medication Practices, I believe they're in Pennsylvania. They have a fellowship program as well. I think it's a 1 year or possibly a 2-year program. Always have opportunities for drug safety, as well as all those other organizations I listed, managed care, specialty pharmacies. And then even large hospitals have safety officers. if you go get a job as a hospital pharmacist and then you really are interested in safety, there is an opportunity to be involved in drug safety in a large institution like an NYU or Beth Israel, one of the very large institutions. Next slide, please. Here's some more terms for you. So as you're going through PharmD school, you're learning a lot and you're wondering, where am I going to use that information? Just learn as much as you can, pay attention, and you might know more about drug safety than you realize. You learned about clinical trials and the different phases in study design, retrospective study, arm design, blinding. All those things are really important if you want to work in pharmacovigilance. The different kinds of adverse events. What's the difference between an adverse event and a medication error? So here's just a bunch of terms that you could use for self-study. The coding people I mentioned use something called MEDRA and a WHO drug dictionary. REMS, it's really important if you could get experience in a REMS drug. One of my products, a Dempist, has a REMS and a black box warning. So there's a specific risk evaluation mitigation strategy associated with a Dempist. CFR, I'm sure you might have learned in one of your courses about the Code of Federal Regulations. Those are two citations of areas in the CFR that mention safety and reporting of adverse events. And lastly, the MedWatch form. That's the form that was developed by the FDA. And like I said, it's not mandatory other than, I think, hospitals, some acute facilities, and there's some states that have enacted mandatory reporting through their health departments. But basically, we have a MedWatch form, and you as a consumer, as a patient, could submit your own, or you could encourage your physician to report it and take a look at the MedWatch form. Next slide, please. These are just some professional skills that you probably are already developing that would be very useful in a role in drug safety. Like I said, have exceptional verbal and written communication skills. And I tell my students and intern to practice. In your own bedroom, you don't have to stand in front of a mirror, but you could rehearse. And I tell my students to rehearse out loud. If you're uncomfortable making a cold call to a physician, make yourself a little script, put some notes on paper, and just practice how you're going to start the conversation after identifying yourself. And it's a very hard thing to do the first time, but after you practice, it comes along quite easily. It's very important to have your therapeutic expertise. If there's an area that you're very interested in, oncology, dermatology, whatever it is, if you could become a subject matter expert, that would be great. So have product knowledge, know your medical terminology, because it's very embarrassing if you're on the phone and a doctor or nurse uses a medical term, you can't say, oh, how do you spell that? But you need to know what they're talking about. So we've all gone through medical background. Presentation skills are very important, whether it's in person or virtually. We all worked virtually during COVID and very successfully. Prepare slides, prepare presentations, both for small groups and large groups, for formal and informal, and just practice. Practice any opportunity and volunteer. If somebody says, who would like to give a presentation, volunteer and you'll get some practice. We use a lot of computers, a lot of databases. Companies have specific databases, so you're not expected to know the database before you work at a company. But if you have some experience with the database, you'll understand how the fields work. Your general Microsoft skills are important, putting together a PowerPoint presentation. And it doesn't have to be fancy. I don't typically, as you can see, I don't typically put pictures or graphs or tables. Simple is fine to get the point across. You need to be very detail oriented. It's important to have analytical skills in pharmacovigilance, think outside the box, notice things that somebody else might not have noticed, and be willing to speak up. Even the introverts, if you have a question or you don't understand something, hopefully somebody else in the group has the same question or the same thought. Um, be brave, be willing to speak up, ask a question, and it might cause a dialogue, a very important dialogue to happen. Be a lifelong learner. Just if you don't know something, look it up, study, read about areas that you're interested in or read about areas that you're unfamiliar with. And for drug safety, you need a good bit of integrity. It's very important. Actually, it's one of the Bayer life skills. The I stands for integrity. And in drug safety, you need to be proactive. Can't be sitting in the background. You have to take interest. Next slide, please. Pharmacovigilance, there are individual roles, so you don't have to be a people leader if you don't want to manage a team or have direct reports. There are folks that are called individual contributors. We have opportunities, like I said, to work on large teams, small teams, regional teams. It's very interesting to work with people from other parts of the world. Almost everybody has fluent English. I'm very surprised and pleased about how easy it is to understand my colleagues all around the world. There's lots of opportunities to train others, to be a mentor, to take on a role as a team lead, whether it's official or not official. Some of the titles are manager, senior manager, associate director. Like I have the safety officer title. There's also group safety leaders and country heads. The country heads in some countries are PharmDs, but mostly we have physicians who have a strong medical background that they worked in medical practice for 10 or 15 years. And so they have patient care, direct patient care and prescribing experience. My last slide just has my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. And then I gave you a link for the CFR, but you could just Google that and you'll find it on your own, I'm sure, without even needing that link. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I enjoy pharmacovigilance. It makes me utilize a lot of my skills. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. We're running a little close on time, but I'll give us just about 10 minutes to do our Q&A. But before we jump into that, just curious to know, what is your number one takeaway from today's session? Your network is your net worth. So important. It was echoed from all of our speakers today. The functional areas in industry, different areas MSLs can serve in. That's one thing. We may have one idea, but from the speakers today, we definitely got a variety of perspectives and learned a lot more about the paths that you can take in industry. Lots of options, yes. Networking, to advocate for yourself. I love that one. There's more than one way to get where you want to go. Very important. And again, not to focus on too much on the titles and stand out by your experience. Love it. Thank you guys for contributing to that. Thank you all for your insights and your expertise tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with everyone. So huge thank you. I learned a lot tonight, and I hope you all did too. Thank you for hanging in there with us. I'll see you all for day 3 tomorrow, where we'll tackle the business side of industry. So have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.